Welcome to the Bowers Museum. I'm Lynn Liu, and I'll be guiding you through a virtual highlights tour of California legacies, missions, and ranchos. Keep in mind there's much more to see in this exhibition, and we hope that you'll join on site soon to explore the gallery in its entirety. While you're here, you will also discover 8 other permanent collection galleries and our current featured exhibitions, which are created in partnership with world-class institutions from around the globe. Visit bowers.org for tickets and more information to start planning your trip today. Two distinct periods are represented in this exhibition. The first, between 1769 and 1821, is California's mission period, where 21 Franciscan missions were established between San Diego and Sonoma to proselytize the indigenous peoples of California and instruct them how to live as citizens of the Viceroyalty of New Spain. The second, starting in 1821, is the Rancho period, wherein the new country of Mexico secularized the missions of Alta California and gave them and other parcels of land out to Mexican citizens. These landholders, called rancheros or Californios, mostly retained their property in California after it was annexed by the United States in 1848. California's history begins long before the period of Spanish colonization explored in this exhibition and is discussed in the museum's first Californians exhibition. The first people to come to California did so thousands of years ago by way of a land bridge crossing what is now the Bering Strait. The rugged coastal mountains of California isolated different groups from one another and led to a great diversity of cultures in the region. In 1542, the Spanish explorer Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo led the first European expedition to sail the coast of modern-day California, making landings on the coast in Channel Islands as far north as modern-day Santa Barbara. His observations on the first Californians mention almost nothing of their innovative stewardship of the region, but did serve as the basis for Spain's claim on the territory of California that same year. The difficult terrain, relative lack of safe harbors, distance from Spanish outposts, and other factors delayed the colonization of the region by over 2 centuries. It was not until after the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, when Russia began to send settlers to the region, that Spain launched an expedition led by Gaspar de Portola and Father Junipero Serra to colonize what they would call Alta California. The missions were conceptualized by the Spanish crown as part of a larger system of presidios and pueblos that allowed them to control the new territory and create new loyal, tax-paying subjects. The Franciscan monks who ventured into Alta California were primarily interested in saving the eternal souls of the local indigenous peoples. Not all natives were forced to convert to Catholicism, but several issues caused or exacerbated by the Spanish, such as food shortages, pandemics, intertribal warfare, and more, pressured them to turn to the missions. Native neophytes were subject to the strict rules laid out by the friars. All were required to work as farmers, builders, ranchers, craftspeople, messengers, and more. Failure to comply, attempting to escape, or fomenting rebellion were all met with harsh punishment. The unhygienic conditions of the missions worsened the spread of the diseases that the Spanish introduced to the region. Ultimately, these factors more than halved the indigenous population of California by the time the missions were closed by the Mexican Secularization Act of 1833. Basketry was employed by indigenous cultures throughout the state before, during, and after the mission era in a variety of objects used in cooking and daily life. A basketry tray such as this would have traditionally been used for gathering nuts and berries that were cultivated by indigenous peoples, or in games. They were woven in a rightward direction from deergrass, sumac, yuccas, and in some cases, yucca and palm. This dispatch bag was made and used around the turn of the 19th century by a native person. Despite the cultural identity of its maker, there is European influence in the unique and intricate lace and fringe application. There are 3 internal compartments in the bag: the main chamber, which houses the documents being transported between missions, and the smaller compartments in which the runner could carry foods such as nuts, seeds, berries, grain, herbs, or dried fish. For the most part, the missions were built by the hands of the indigenous peoples they were to proselytize and made of locally sourced materials like wood, stone, and adobe. This keystone supported one of the 7 domes of the Great Stone Church of Mission San Juan Capistrano, which was built by converts from the Ashaman tribe. An 1812 earthquake caused the building to collapse during a morning mass, killing 40 Ashaman living at the mission. Statues such as this one of Saint Anthony were carved in New Spain and brought north, in this case to be displayed at Mission San Juan Capistrano's Serra Chapel. After Mexican independence from Spain in 1821, the missions were seen as being more loyal to the Spanish crown than the new Mexican government. In 1833, a secularization law was passed, which theoretically turned control over mission lands to the indigenous peoples, but in actuality was barely observed. Shortly after secularization, the sculpture was given to Don Bernardo Yorba for his private chapel. Mexican independence opened the door to California's Rancho period. Prior to independence, the colonial governors of Alta California leased land to private citizens on behalf of the Spanish crown. Following independence, those leases were converted into land grants, and substantially more grants were issued. By the time California was ceded to the United States under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, 813 land grants were claimed by Californios, and California honored 553 of them. Let's look at some of the artifacts used by the most influential Californios who lived in what is today Orange County. Don Bernardo Yorba was the son of Don Jose Antonio Yorba I, a Spanish soldier who came to California in 1769 with Gaspar de Portola. Don Bernardo was the first Californio to use irrigation agriculture and vastly grew his family's land holdings. Rancho families were, like settlers everywhere in the world, very partial to fineries from overseas. This colorful chest of drawers purchased for his daughter, Doña Maria Jesus Yorba, was made in China from camphor wood. Doña Maria worked hard to continue her father's legacy, an important part which was the raising of livestock. Rancho family members each had their own branding irons. This happens to be Doña Maria's personal brand. There are several more examples of branded leather and branding irons throughout the exhibition, including a brand used by Don Juan Forster before he sold his rancho holdings of Mission Viejo to Richard O'Neill. Don Juan Forster, born John Forster, was the only non-Hispanic rancho grantee in Orange County. He came to California from Guaymas, Mexico in 1833 and married Maria Isadora Pico, the sister of Pio and Andres Pico. At one point, Forster owned Rancho Trabuco, Rancho Mission Vieja, Mission San Juan Capistrano, and more. Don Juan reportedly purchased his brandy still during one of his many sea voyages. It is the first still to be brought to Alta California. He had a reputation for producing fine liqueurs, and it was said that his wine especially could not be surpassed. Brandy was manufactured by both the missions and early rancheros for exchange with foreign traders. Pio Pico is perhaps the most pivotal figure of the Rancho period. As governor pro tem, he ordered the sale of California missions in compliance with a controversial 1833 order from Mexico to secularize the missions. A little over a decade later, as the last Mexican governor of Alta California, Pico responded to American settlers seizing control of the Mexican government headquarters in Sonoma by ordering an ill-fated counteroffensive and was forced to flee to Mexico. After Alta California was ceded to the United States, Pico returned and reclaimed the titles to his 22,000 acres of ranch lands. He was fond of the good life, but plagued by lifelong legal troubles over his land holdings and an addiction to gambling. The pairing proved disastrous to his personal fortune. In 1890, his debtors foreclosed on his adobe house, and Pio Pico died almost penniless in Los Angeles. 3 years later. This carriage was used by Pio Pico and his family during better times. With a black leather upholstered bench and cushioned fall, the cart was an ideal vehicle for short-distance joyrides or trips into town. Pio Pico knew better than anyone that California statehood meant the beginning of the end for the Rancho period. Anglo boosters worked slowly but surely to erode the Spanish Rancho system and take control of California. Ironically, real estate developers used missions, symbols of Spain's colonial grip on California, as romanticized icons in drawing Americans westward. The architecture of the Bowers Museum's historic building, which itself dates back to the museum's opening in 1936, has whitewashed walls, red tile roofs, a bell tower, murals, and more, in a style hearkening to the lasting legacy of California's Mission and Rancho periods. We hope that you enjoyed your virtual tour of California Legacies, Missions, and Ranchos. For more on the subject, please consider visiting the Bowers Museum in person or participating in one of our many exhibition-related programs. Details for events and planning your visit can be found at bowers.org. Thank you, as always, for your support.